Hey everybody, this is Mark Smith, host of Digital Roughnecks, and I'm here with Geoffrey Cann, who's principal of geoffreycann.com. Welcome, Geoffrey.
Hey, thank you so much, Mark.
Now I'm excited about this because you were actually one of the first episodes of Digital Roughnecks way back then when I was just getting started in this field. And at the time, I had just taken your class on Udemy on digital oil and gas, and
Right.
it was looking at your book and all that kind of stuff. But a lot has happened in the last year and a half or so, and you got a new book coming out. So tell me about that.
Well, the when the first book was published, the first book, by the way, is Bits, Bytes, and Barrels, the digital transformation of oil and gas. And its idea, its observation was that digitally driven change, which had impacted all of these other industries from telecommunications, finance, and retail, would eventually come to oil and gas because the oil and gas industry is actually a composite of all of these industries. You sell gasoline at a retail site. The oil and gas industry buys a lot of stuff. Well, that's part of the supply chain overhaul that Amazon has driven. Wouldn't have been an hour after the book was out, someone called me and said, "You need to write the second book," which is who does this well? What are the case studies of companies that are pioneering here? And so during the pandemic, I set out to actually craft the second book because what I was watching was how the pandemic had accelerated the adoption of digital innovation throughout the oil and gas industry. And I was curious as to why that was for such a risk-averse industry. Why would it change so much faster? I had executives tell me they think the industry has advanced 20 years in 20 months, which is for our industry is just extraordinary pace.
Right.
So I set out to write the next book, and what I've noted, the new book is called Carbon, Capital, and the Cloud, a playbook for digital oil and gas. And its hypothesis is that there are two dramatic waves of change coming at the industry, and with consequences for a third. The first wave is broadly it's ESG, but my shorthand is carbon. And that relates to decarbonization of the industrial economy as we know it, and the pressures that places on oil and gas, both as a producer of carbon-based product and a consumer during the process of producing that product. Digital, which is the possibilities provided by digital transformation, which the industry has discovered has been actually quite profitable, and capital. So cloud is shorthand for digital, and capital refers to the capital markets, which now dramatically outvalue, in my view, the digitally driven companies of Alphabet, Amazon, Google. We know who they are, and undervalues the energy providers to our economy. Even though the energy companies are revenue rich, they're stock market poor, and unless we fix that, correct the capital market imbalance, we won't have the capital access we need to further the energy transition. So it's kind of like a Gordian knot. You have to unpeel it. We need the capital for energy transition, and if we don't have that, we can't decarbonize, and that's going to require injection of funds into our industrial economy. And my argument in the book is that there's a sweet spot of digital innovation which transforms the narrative for capital markets, helps decarbonize the economy, and advances the oil and gas industry as digital animals. And that's the whole idea of the idea of a playbook. What are the plays you can make to accelerate that journey?
Excellent. Well, and you guys, we were talking beforehand just of the impact of ESG investors, right? When I first got into this, year and a half ago, a couple years ago, and we would talk to executives from oil and gas, right? A lot of people would bring Clean Connect in because of regulations, EPA, whatnot. But something shifted, and it was during the pandemic. And all of a sudden, that became the number two reason even, or even number three. ESG became number one. And especially if they'd gone through any kind of merger, M&A, or needed capital, whatever, all of a sudden these ESG. So I'm looking at, wait, how much money do these ESG guys control, right? Well, at the time, there was this group called Climate Action 100, and they claimed, hey, $54 trillion of private equity money is controlled by ESG investors. I go, well, that's a pretty big number, right? We're talking about the infrastructure bill at $2 trillion. That's a big number, but $54 trillion's a lot bigger. Well, then I came away looking at this whole COP26 thing, in Glasgow a month or so ago. All the guys in the world get together talking about climate change or whatever. But the big thing that came out of there wasn't what the government was going to do. It was all the money guys got together and say, hey, we now control $120 trillion of private equity. So pretty much, if you're going to go to the money guys, it's ESG. So you better have your ESG story down, which is, I think, where you're going with your book.
Oh, they're completely right. If you don't have an ESG story, you do not get money, number one. If you do have a good ESG story, you're in that's I see that as table stakes. You need to have that to kind of move along. You still have to have a competent business model story to survive in the long term. It's just being ESG is not sufficient. You still have to have a proper and thoughtful narrative about how your company is going to succeed in what is becoming a very, very digitally driven world, and one with a much higher sensitivity around things like public health. And I think it's the successful companies are going to be the ones that somehow figure out how they marry up their digital story, their ESG story, and fit that against a capital market that's seeking improved returns from energy. And that's the pathway forward.
So Geoffrey and I have been sort of scheming behind the scenes to come up with an actual full day conference called ESG for Energy. And you'll be talking in that conference about the things that you discovered with some of the best practices out there, case studies and whatnot of companies that are making these moves, with carbon tracking and AI and all this kind of stuff, which is what we'll be doing. So I'm super excited about that. And just give me an idea of one of the things that you discovered along as you're writing this book.
Well, one of the critical things is that the pace of the companies to adopt digital innovation and react to carbon are offset with the ability of the people who work in energy to embrace change at the same pace. In other words, we have clock speed challenge. We've got digital racing ahead on its clock speed. We have oil and gas, which transitions and does things quite slowly. But during the pandemic, that's stepped up. And now we have the biggest challenge that the industry faces is that we have successfully moved boards, senior management teams, and a small group of digital or ESG leaders forward in figuring out what to do. But we now have to move 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 people who are the actual arms and legs in the business to move forward to. That's probably been the biggest single insight. There's not a single company I've spoken to that has not said, this is fundamentally a people challenge. We will not succeed unless we move our people faster through this journey. If there was a second thing that they would say uniformly is that they've discovered that data is actually one of the critical drivers of success here, and getting really smart on data and information is fundamental now. So there's two things that the industry has to figure out how to do quickly at pace: move people faster through this journey, and deal with the underlying data asset that they have, and they're going to have for a digital transformation to be successful.
So Geoffrey, we just teased two things here. We teased an upcoming conference here, which I'm going to share. So if you go to esgforenergy.com, you're going to hit a registration screen. You can kind of see it right here. It's free for energy pros. And, it explains exactly what you're going to get. But in here, we have this framework that we sort of mapped out that puts all of these things into practice in a very practical way. And we're actually going to have energy companies themselves show how they're working through this framework to essentially, automate their ESG reporting, automate compliance, attract ESG capital without repelling it, and on and on and on. So that's good. And the other thing too is Geoffrey just mentioned, his book that's coming out. And if you're interested in getting sort of the behind the scenes sneak peek, whatever, then Geoffrey, what should they do?
All you have to do is visit my website, and you'll see right on the banner, new book coming. If you click a notification link, you can set yourself up to receive alerts about the book, its progress, when it's going to be available. For instance, the review draft will be available on December 21st. And anyone whose name is on the list on December 21st was going to get a copy of the review draft. The review draft is not the full book. It's missing table of contents and page numbers and other odds and ends. But fundamentally, it'll be a product that's worth taking a look at. And then I'll be releasing other freebies over the course of the next 90 to 120 days.
But also, too, if they just want to set up a one-on-one meeting with you to kind of pick your, yeah.
Yep, that's it. So it's just on the page there'll be a contact me and a drop down box where you can contact me on whatever you have in mind. My phone number's there. Very few people publish the phone number, but my phone number's there. Just call me.
That's right. Look, guys, it's a phenomenal thing where you could accelerate your learning about what Geoffrey and I have learned being in this industry, and what cutting edge companies are doing around getting their ESG stuff together. So anyway, Geoffrey, so much. Thank you for this. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Yep. And again, sign up for the esgforenergy.com or visit geoffreycann.com to get a one-on-one meeting and get early copies of the book before anybody else.